In August of 1996, shooting began on what would end up being the final movie starring Chris Farley, Almost Heroes, a historical comedy film about two men attempting to journey across the United States to the Pacific Ocean before Lewis and Clark.
The buffalo is near now.
You can tell that just by sniffing its droppings.
No, I can see the herd right over there.
From its inception, Almost Heroes was envisioned as a lighthearted ensemble comedy, reminiscent of something from the mind of Mel Brooks.
Let it be known that if I catch any man looking at her, I will gut him like a pig. Hey!
And Chris Farley saw it as the perfect opportunity to stretch his comedy with material that was a bit more mature than his previous movies. But after production wrapped, the studio took it upon themselves to reshape Almost Heroes into more of a slapstick buddy comedy that completely steered away from the tone of its original screenplay.
Oh God, no!
In today's episode, we'll be looking back on the making of Almost Heroes, from its somewhat troubled production to its legacy as Chris Farley's swan song and only box office bomb as a leading man.
We got a date!
In a tasty new movie. He's clever. He's smart. Chris Farley.
You want my head to explode?
Matthew Perry. Trust me, the worst is over. They're hitting the road and anything else that gets in their way. Almost Heroes, rated PG-13. Starts Friday, May 29th at a theater near you.
Almost Heroes started out as the brainchild of a bunch of sitcom writers who simply had an idea for a Lewis and Clark comedy. As they kicked some ideas around, the concept was quickly changed, and the title they settled on was Edwards and Hunt.
Men that may not have possessed the courage, vision, or intelligence of Lewis and Clark, but men nonetheless.
The movie would be about Leslie Edwards, a dapper, self-centered aristocrat hell-bent on getting to the Pacific Ocean before Lewis and Clark.
What do you do with your leisure time? Leisure time. You know, time for yourself, where you don't have to work. Leisure... never mind.
Who enlists the help of a tracker and wilderness expert with a scattered brain and a heart of gold by the name of Bartholomew Hunt.
And this is the lowercase a. And this is the upper...
Enough! You want my head to explode?
Through a shared connection at the William Morris Agency, the completed screenplay ended up in the hands of Steve Odekirk, one of Jim Carrey's best friends and, more importantly, writer and director on Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls. And Steve's enthusiasm over the screenplay was pretty much all it took to kick off a Hollywood bidding war. And who do you think ended up buying it? Paramount, Universal, Hollywood Pictures? Nah, man, old Ted Turner, the wrestling guy.
Another fantastic decision by Hollywood.
With the recent release of The Pagemaster and one of my personal favorites, Angus, Turner Pictures was trying to expand upon their big screen catalog with more comedies and family films, not just movies with posters of mustached men wearing cool hats. Their financial backing, combined with all of the positive buzz the script was getting, managed to entice, well, somebody you immediately think of when you hear the words cult and comedy strung together. Christopher Guest, the man responsible for popularizing the phrase up to 11.
One louder. Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
A legend in the world of satire and mockumentary was hired to direct Edwards and Hunt.
Edwards and Hunt is about two guys trying to beat Lewis and Clark to the Pacific, but Lewis and Clark have left 2 weeks before, so they got to...
That sounds very funny. We'll be watching for that.
Although the writers were insistent on casting great, classically trained actors in the movie, the studio wanted big name appeal on this thing. Chris Farley was the first person hired for the movie, and unlike Black Sheep, which he only did because of a contractual obligation with Paramount, and Beverly Hills Ninja, which he only did for the money, Edwards and Hunt was a project that he was truly excited to be a part of.
Edwards and Hunt, and that one, man, Kyle, I bet it's a little more edgy, you know, and it's got some more adult themes to it, you know, so that one, I hope you like that one too.
I've actually heard the rumor on this movie is supposed to be pretty good.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
Chris's involvement covered the lighthearted comedy side of the equation, so much like the recently successful Dumb and Dumber, the writers thought it would be great to pair Farley up with a classically trained actor with some solid comedic chops. They really wanted Hugh Laurie for the role of Leslie Edwards, but at the time he wasn't super well known in the United States, so the studio didn't put any thought into the suggestion, putting the kibosh on it almost immediately.
I don't quite understand. You carry on the good work.
Very well, sir.
As much as I'd like to shit on Turner Pictures for passing up that golden opportunity, I mean, Farley and Laurie, come on, that would have been amazing. They probably realized their lack of foresight when 101 Dalmatians came out less than a year later, and the movie just completely dominated the box office, also providing Hugh Laurie with a launching pad for mainstream US audiences. But Turner did consider another Hugh in Hugh Grant, who was actually attached to the movie for quite some time before bowing out.
Let me start with question number 1. What the hell were you thinking?
Also, Christopher Guest apparently met face-to-face with Bill Murray to offer him the part, but he unfortunately turned it down. However, with the sitcom Friends pretty much dominating the cultural zeitgeist around that point in time, when Matthew Perry's name was thrown into the mix, the studio exercised all options to get him involved. And by all options, I mean more money than the $1 million he was paid for the movie Fools Rush In.
Deal! Great things are in store for us.
One of the film's writers, Tom Wolfe, later admitted that he and his co-writers weren't that thrilled with a TV actor being the co-star of their first movie. But as he hilariously pointed out, this was their first film, so the caterer had more power than they did. With casting done and a director in place, production began in July of 1996. Although it was filmed throughout Northern California, the movie starts out in Arlington, Virginia, where Bartholomew Hunt is going to be hanged for drunken and disorderly conduct.
I want you to lower me from these gallows and kiss my hairy buttocks!
Only to be saved by a presidential pardon at the hand of Leslie Edwards.
Thomas Jefferson!
You would think saving his life would be enough of a reason for him to accompany Edwards on his journey to the Pacific, but although he's a classless drunk who enjoys watching livestock to the horizontal mambo, Bartholomew is smart enough to understand the risks involved in saddling up for a journey alongside a guy who clearly hasn't spent any time in the wilderness.
The boats have been fully loaded, and we haven't even taken on my hats and tea service.
And knowing about Chris's struggles with alcohol abuse during this time, the classless drunk aspect is kind of what makes certain scenes a bit difficult to watch.
We both know how you get when you drink.
Oh yes, we do.
Chris Farley had a rehab stint prior to filming, and while he was clean and sober for a majority of the shoot, early on the producers found out he was drinking in his off time and the entire production was nearly shut down. Because of that, Chris would be accompanied by a number of sobriety bodyguards for the rest of the film's production. Bokeem Woodbine recalls that, initially at least, he was completely unaware of Chris's history with alcohol abuse, so after a day of filming, Bokeem handed him a beer to open because Chris had a trick of opening a bottle with a Bic lighter that he wanted to see. While he was holding the bottle, Chris's hand was shaking almost violently. When Chris excused himself from the situation, Matthew Perry said to Bokeem, "What the hell's wrong with you? Chris is an alcoholic. He's having a hard time right now and you're giving him a fucking beer to open?" Bokeem later said, "If I had known, I never would have even brought the beer around." While those binge drinking scenes are kind of hard to watch, Bartholomew Hunt was Chris Farley's first role on the big screen that, while definitely a bit clumsy at times and often screaming at the top of his lungs,
now this should dull your senses.
All right. Oh!
actually comes across as one of the most intelligent characters he's ever played. I mean, his reading comprehension skills are a bit questionable.
Mahaba.
But he's the most street smart, or I guess wilderness smart character in the entire film.
They're portaging because they think the river is too dangerous up ahead. And I think we should do the same.
And although the movie wasn't written by Christopher Guest, the biggest commonality it shares with some of his films are the strong supporting characters.
That French animal bit my ear off!
That's an absurd exaggeration.
Assisting Edwards and Hunt along their journey are, well, all of the idiots who weren't deemed smart or skilled enough to go along with Lewis and Clark.
Hello, can you hear me? I can hear you, Pratt.
Frequent guest collaborator Eugene Levy plays a character named Guy Fontenot.
It's my understanding that you have mastered the languages of all the indigenous population from here to the Pacific.
Who told you this?
You did, in your letter.
The letter. Then it is the truth.
Patrick Cranshaw, who just a few years later portrayed fan-favorite character Blue in Old School, plays an old man named Jackson who hilariously bickers with Bartholomew the second they meet.
Horse's ass.
Turd.
Bokeem Woodbine appears as Leslie Edwards' servant Jonah, and I know people like to poke fun at this dude by calling him Evil Dave Chappelle, but in the scenes that made the final cut at least, he gets some of the biggest laughs.
For the love of God, man! It says welcome to Snake's Bend. Oh, God, yeah.
The crew is rounded out by Bidwell, Higgins, Father Gerard, and of course, to keep the movie from being a total sausage fest, Edwards and Hunt's version of Sacagawea, Shekinah, played by Lisa B.
I said
said, all right, Mr. Hunt, that will be enough.
You want to be alone so you can shake hands with Ben Franklin, huh?
Aside from the harsh realities of the North American wilderness, the crew runs into a completely harmless Native American tribe that Hunt talks up as a bunch of murderous savages, which is just an excuse to dump Edward's overpacked junk.
I had to give them a few of your finer things, of course, so they wouldn't kill us.
By the way, the slap-happy Native American known as Bent Twig in that scene was played by the recently passed Jonathan Joss. He didn't really have much screen time here, but I was always a big fan of his characters John Redcorn in King of the Hill, and of course Chief Ken Hotate in Parks and Rec.
There are two things I know about white people. They love Matchbox 20, and they are terrified of curses.
But later on, they encounter a band of conquistadors led by a man who simply goes by the name Hidalgo, and his interactions with Guy Fontenot provide some of the funniest moments in the film. It turns out that Guy's loyalties are extremely weak, so he joins up with Hidalgo at one point, and his misunderstanding of the word gauntlet,
You don't think I know where there's a gauntlet? Gauntlet?
combined with the face he makes after Hidalgo asks,
Whose idea was the call?
is truly priceless. When production wrapped on October 2nd, 1996, the movie was planned to release the following year.
Now, you're working on a film project I heard about with Chris Farley and who else?
Matthew Perry. It comes out in the summer.
Now, have you already completed it?
It's being completed. I'm still editing right now, but it will be ready for the summer.
That is, until a deal was struck that shook the entire entertainment industry to its core.
It appears to be a done deal. Just about an hour ago, 99% of the Turner shareholders voted in favor of the $7.5 billion merger with Time Warner. And Time Warner shareholders also gave a near unanimous thumbs up. The deal will create the world's largest media and entertainment company. A triumphant Ted Turner called it a dream, and Time Warner's chairman, Gerald Levin, declared, "We're now one team and one family."
Honestly, the WB-Turner merger didn't have an immediate impact on Edwards and Hunt. I just wanted to add some dramatic flair to the video. But as of February 1997, when Christopher Guest appeared on Conan to promote Waiting for Guffman, Edwards and Hunt was set for release that summer.
And this comes out in the summer.
But once Turner Pictures fell into the hands of Warner Brothers, they decided to make some drastic changes to the movie that ultimately delayed its release by almost a full year. They wanted to squeeze every dime out of Edwards and Hunt, which meant, first of all, changing the title. Edwards and Hunt, the first American road trip, floated around for a bit before they settled on Almost Heroes. Which, by the way, doesn't make any sense because how exactly are they almost heroes? They reached their goal at the end of the movie, and it's not like this is the untold story of real guys who had their glory taken away by Lewis and Clark. They're fictional.
We're the first to conquer this great continent.
But they also gutted the movie's ensemble comedy characteristics in order to align it with Chris Farley's recent big screen successes. Writer Tom Wolfe later admitted that even before they merged with Time Warner, Turner always saw Edwards and Hunt as less of an ensemble comedy and more of a buddy comedy like Farley's previous efforts with David Spade. Chris's friend and former assistant Ted Dondanville was on set for the entirety of the shoot, and he claims that the film's runtime was chopped down in order to build the movie around the star, being Chris Farley. So the supporting character lines and scenes were cut first.
Can you deny an old man his dream?
Matthew Perry's were cut second.
Then go right ahead.
With pretty much all of Chris's stuff being left in.
Go to hell.
In regards to Matthew Perry's character, there was originally a subplot involving his significant other, played by Parker Posey. In the first version of the movie, she was going to be shown at the party towards the beginning, and somehow end up meeting the crew at the Pacific during the final act. There are no pictures or deleted scenes of her in the film, but throughout the movie, she's shown on these paintings in the background of Leslie Edwards' tent. I'm not sure if her character was removed because the ending changed, or if the ending changed because her character was removed. But yeah, this whole thing with Farley being swept up by an eagle didn't originally cap off the movie. For the reshot ending, which was seemingly filmed months after principal photography completed in October of 1996, production was moved from upstate California 800 miles south to Black's Beach in San Diego. Which is ironic because they forgot to call up the one black guy in the movie when they reshot the scene.
I'm going with Mr. Hunt.
Bokeem Woodbine's character Jonah mysteriously disappears between the conquistador fight and the meetup on the cliff. He later commented on this by saying, "They totally reshot the ending without my character there. That kind of shit happens sometimes, you don't get your feelings hurt." But the thing is, it affected the film, because it wasn't linear. It's like, what happened to the brother?
It's your prerogative, sir.
The only evidence of the film's original ending are these production stills where Matthew Perry is seen wearing a fringe coat that he never wears in the final movie. And when you compare these stills to the actual ending, they kind of tell a completely different story as to what the actors were going through in the time between those shoots. Chris Farley, while completely sober for most of the film's initial shoot in 1996, had a short relapse after production wrapped. Information on this movie is really lacking, so I'm not exactly sure when this rewritten ending was shot, but you can clearly see that Chris Farley had gained a bit of weight, he had dark circles under his eyes, and his facial hair was visibly scruffier. Meanwhile, Matthew Perry looks almost shockingly thin and pale compared to the rest of the film. As revealed in his 2022 memoir, Matthew sustained some pretty serious injuries during a jet ski accident on the set of the movie Fools Rush In. While trying to film a scene after the accident, he complained that he was in pain, and so a set doctor handed him one single Vicodin pill to help him get through the shoot. Edwards and Hunt and season 3 of Friends began filming just a few months later, and by that point, Matthew admitted that the one pill he took spiraled out of control into a full-blown addiction, and he was now taking 55 Vicodin per day.
55 Vicodin a day.
55?
Yeah.
Because of that, he couldn't keep food down, and he began to lose weight rapidly. Matthew recounted that his weight varied between 128 and 225 pounds during his time on Friends, and this reshot ending seemingly lined up with the lower end of that weight range. With Edwards and Hunt being chopped and reshot under its new owners at Time Warner, the movie's release ended up being delayed until May 29th, 1998, nearly 2 years after it started filming, and of course about 5.5 months after Chris Farley passed away. At that point, Matthew Perry was sent out to promote the movie, discussing his time working with Farley and of course his untimely passing, all while secretly dealing with his own personal addictions. When the star of a movie passes away before its theatrical release, the studio is already put in a weird position when it comes to promotion. But Time Warner specifically marketed the film as a slapstick comedy by running this one ad that was quite literally the very definition of slapstick.
We got a beast! Almost Heroes. Rated PG-13. Starts Friday, May 29th at a theater near you.
They also paired up a specifically made commercial with Saturday Night Live's tribute to Chris Farley.
Tonight, we join in celebrating the life of a legend whose laughter lives on.
But none of that seemed to help because Almost Heroes was just a complete box office flop, earning roughly $6 million on a reported $30 million budget, while also being completely torn down by critics. Unlike the effect that Brandon Lee had on The Crow or Heath Ledger had on The Dark Knight, it seems like Chris Farley's passing didn't give the movie sort of an aura that attracted audiences to see his big screen swan song as a leading man. This whole scenario was very similar to one of John Candy's final movies, Wagons East, which weirdly enough had a very similar plot and poster. It also did not help that Time Warner dropped the movie into theaters 1 week after Godzilla, which had the power of a big-ass lizard, Edie's ice cream, and the Taco Bell dog on its side.
Hey, Godzilla, want something to drink?
If the studio hadn't meddled with pretty much every process of the movie from casting to editing, you have to wonder if Almost Heroes would have had a better legacy. I have nothing against Matthew Perry, and while he did a good enough job in the movie, pairing him up with Farley was kind of a weird choice. Even the producer admitted as much years after the fact. But I truly believe Hugh Laurie would have had a great back and forth with Chris, all while lending more international appeal to the movie. And considering the fact that Almost Heroes only played on big screens in North America and was simply dumped onto VHS overseas, that would have only helped the movie's cause. Shortly after Almost Heroes fizzled out of theaters, Chris appeared in his final big screen movie as a supporting character in Dirty Work, a movie I will definitely do a video on someday. Considering that the boutique physical media label Vinegar Syndrome is soon releasing an extended R-rated cut of that movie, I'd love to see them or another label put out a new version of Almost Heroes with all of the deleted scenes included, or in a perfect world, Christopher Guest's original ensemble cut. It would be a great way to honor the stars now that they're both passed, while also giving the fans the director's original vision for the movie. But that'll do it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts on Almost Heroes down below, and as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.